Prepare yourself for a story that will twist your gut and leave you questioning the very nature of family. It's a tale of betrayal, ambition, and a father's unwavering pursuit of justice. This isn't just another story, it's a raw, unfiltered look at how far someone will go for fame, and the devastating consequences that follow. I'm talking about a daughter who used her own father's name, a man of impeccable integrity, to build a fraudulent charity, all for her own personal gain. And what's worse? She thought she could get away with it. She underestimated the quiet power of a man who had spent his life upholding the law. This is the story of Judge Arthur Blackwell, a retired pillar of the community, and his daughter, Caroline. Caroline, you see, always craved the spotlight. She yearned for the glittering world of high society, and she saw her father's respected name as the perfect stepping stone. So, she created the Blackwell Charitable Foundation, plastering his image everywhere, painting him as a frail, ailing man whose legacy needed to be honored. The donations poured in, but where did they really go? Certainly not to the people in need. You might be thinking, how could a father do this to his own daughter? Believe me, that question haunted Judge Blackwell every step of the way. But imagine the gut-wrenching realization that someone you raised, someone you loved unconditionally, was capable of such deceit. Imagine the sting of betrayal, the burning anger mixed with a profound sense of disappointment. He was a man of justice, and justice demanded to be served, even if it meant exposing his own flesh and blood. The irony is thick enough to choke on. Caroline, in her relentless pursuit of fame, actually orchestrated her own downfall. She was so blinded by ambition that she never considered her father might see through her charade. She left a trail of evidence, a digital and paper breadcrumb path leading straight to her lavish lifestyle, fueled by stolen donations. And Judge Blackwell, with his years of experience dissecting lies and uncovering hidden truths, followed that trail with unwavering determination. He hired a private investigator, a trusted colleague from his past, to document everything. Every shopping spree, every extravagant dinner, every first-class flight, all meticulously recorded. He could have confronted her directly, of course. He could have staged a private intervention, begged her to stop. But that wasn't justice. That was a band-aid on a gaping wound. Caroline needed to understand the gravity of her actions, and the world needed to see the truth. So, he hatched a plan, a calculated, meticulous plan to expose her at the very event she was using to solidify her fraudulent image, the Blackwell Charitable Foundation's inaugural gala. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a collision of ambition and justice. He played the part of the frail, doting father perfectly. He allowed Caroline to bask in the limelight, to accept accolades for her philanthropic work, all the while knowing that her house of cards was about to come crashing down. The tension must have been unbearable, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on him with each passing moment. But he remained calm, resolute, a sleeping giant waiting for the opportune moment to strike. This wasn't about revenge, it was about upholding the principles he had dedicated his life to. It was about protecting the vulnerable people Caroline had exploited. And it was about sending a clear message: no one is above the law, not even family. Prepare to witness the fallout, the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, and the unwavering strength of a father who refused to let injustice prevail. This is a story you won't soon forget. Prepare to witness the fallout, the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, and the unwavering strength of a father who refused to let injustice prevail. This is a story you won't soon forget. And believe me, I haven't. To watch your own child, the person you cradled in your arms, the one you guided through life's early stumbles, betray you so profoundly, it's a pain unlike any other. It's a cold, sharp ache that settles deep in your bones, a constant reminder of the shattered trust and the bitter truth. I dedicated my life to upholding the law, to dispensing justice fairly and impartially. I never imagined that the greatest injustice I would face would come from within my own family. Caroline, my daughter, always possessed a certain ambition. A relentless drive to be noticed, to be admired, to climb the social ladder. I saw it as youthful enthusiasm, a harmless desire to make her mark on the world. But somewhere along the line, that ambition twisted, warped into something unrecognizable, something dangerous. She craved the spotlight, not for the good she could do, but for the validation it provided. And she saw my reputation, my years of dedicated service, as a stepping stone to her own self-aggrandizement. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation. The very name tasted like ash in my mouth. She launched it without a word to me, plastering my image across the promotional materials, painting me as a frail, ailing figure whose legacy needed protecting. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was using my supposed weakness to fuel her own ascent. At first, I dismissed it as misguided enthusiasm. Perhaps she genuinely believed she was doing something good, albeit in a terribly misguided way. But then I overheard the phone call. That casual, callous dismissal of charitable funds as operating expenses, a designer handbag, no less, that was the final straw. That was the moment the scales fell from my eyes, and I saw my daughter for who she truly was, a fraud, a charlatan, a woman willing to exploit her own father for personal gain. The anger was immediate, visceral. A burning rage that threatened to consume me. But beneath the anger, a cold calculation began to take hold. I knew I couldn't confront her directly. She would deny it, deflect, manipulate. I needed proof. I needed irrefutable evidence of her deceit. And so, I did what any seasoned judge would do, I hired a private investigator. Someone I trusted implicitly, someone who could operate discreetly and efficiently. I knew the risks. Exposing my own daughter would be a painful, public ordeal. But the thought of her continuing to prey on the generosity of others, of tarnishing my name with her lies, that was simply unacceptable. The reports came in daily, each one more damning than the last. Lavish spending, first-class travel, exorbitant dinners. And the most sickening detail of all, less than 5% of the money raised actually reached those in need. The rest lined Caroline's pockets, fueling her extravagant lifestyle. The frustration was immense. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, to demand an explanation. But I held back. I knew that premature action would only alert her, allowing her to cover her tracks. I needed to play the long game. I needed to let her climb to the very peak of her false success, only to then pull the rug out from under her in the most devastating way possible. The annual charity ball. A grotesque parody of philanthropy, designed to further inflate Caroline's ego. I agreed to attend, playing the part of the frail, doting old man. I sat at the head table, a silent observer, watching her bask in the adoration of the crowd. The smug look on her face, the self-satisfied smile, it fueled my resolve. I knew that this was the moment. This was the stage for her downfall. When she took to the podium to accept the Philanthropist of the Year award, she invited me to speak. A fatal mistake. A trap of her own making. I rose slowly, leaning heavily on my cane. My voice was weak at first, trembling slightly. But as I spoke, my voice grew stronger, clearer, resonating with the authority of a judge presiding over a courtroom. Instead of a speech, I said, I want to show you my daughter's true dedication. And then, I gestured to the large screen behind the stage. The documentary began to play, images of receipts, phone recordings, furtive footage of Caroline shopping and bragging. The evidence was undeniable, irrefutable. The video ended with a stark pie chart, 95% embezzled. The silence in the room was deafening. I looked directly at Caroline, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. Justice must be served, I said, whether in or out of the courtroom. It was a trial, but not in the traditional sense. It was a trial by public opinion, a trial of conscience. The severity of her actions demanded a response, and I was the one who had to deliver it. The investigation followed swiftly, inevitably. Caroline's reputation was shattered, her social standing destroyed. It was a painful consequence, but a necessary one. I took over the charity, using my personal fortune to replace the stolen funds and restructuring it into a transparent, efficient organization. It was my way of righting the wrong, of restoring the integrity that Caroline had so carelessly disregarded. In the end, there was a measure of tolerance, even reconciliation, though the scars remain. I learned that even those closest to us are capable of profound betrayal, and that the pursuit of justice sometimes requires us to make the most difficult of choices. But remember this, true justice is not about revenge, it's about accountability, about ensuring that the truth prevails. And sometimes, the truth hurts the most. So, the next time you consider donating to a charity, do your research. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Because in a world where ambition can corrupt even the closest of bonds, vigilance is our greatest weapon. Demand transparency. Because in a world where ambition can corrupt even the closest of bonds, vigilance is our greatest weapon. And believe me, I learned that the hard way. You see, I'm Arthur Blackwell, a retired judge, and for years, I thought I knew my daughter, Caroline. I thought I understood her drive, her desire for success. But I was wrong. Terribly wrong. She saw my name, my reputation, as a stepping stone, a tool to further her own ambitions. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation, she called it. A noble endeavor, seemingly. But beneath the surface, it was a carefully constructed facade, a means to an end. Her end. The anger still simmers, you know. The betrayal cuts deep. To think, the woman I raised, the child I cherished, could so coldly and calculatingly exploit my legacy for personal gain. I remember the first inkling of doubt, a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The constant press releases, the endless photo ops, the way she'd emphasize my declining health, while simultaneously touting the foundation's success. It felt manufactured. And then, I overheard that phone call. A casual, dismissive conversation with a friend, punctuated by laughter as she joked about using donation money to buy a designer handbag. Operating expenses, she quipped. That was the breaking point. That was when the judge and me, the investigator, the father, all roared to life. I couldn't confront her directly. Not yet. I needed proof. Solid, irrefutable evidence. So, I did what any self-respecting retired judge would do, I hired a private investigator. Someone I trusted implicitly, someone who understood the nuances of the law and the subtleties of human deception. The reports started coming in daily. Meticulous accounts of lavish spending, first-class travel, exorbitant dinners. And the most damning statistic of all, less than 5% of the money raised actually reached those in need. It was a sickening revelation. I felt a cold, burning rage, a profound sense of violation. My name, my reputation, tarnished by my own daughter's greed. But I couldn't let anger consume me. I needed a plan. A carefully orchestrated strategy to expose her deceit and reclaim my honor. I decided to play along, to feign ignorance, to allow her to bask in her ill-gotten glory. Let her climb to the highest peak, I thought, so the fall would be all the more devastating. The annual charity ball was her idea, of course. A glittering affair, a celebration of her philanthropy. She insisted I attend, as the guest of honor. I obliged, playing the part of the frail, doting old man, fueling her arrogance with my apparent acquiescence. The night of the gala arrived, a whirlwind of flashing lights, forced smiles, and insincere compliments. Caroline was radiant, basking in the attention, accepting accolades with practiced humility. When she took the stage to receive the Philanthropist of the Year award, the irony was almost unbearable. She invited me to say a few words, a gesture of calculated respect. That was the trap she set for herself. I rose to the podium, my voice trembling slightly at first, but gradually gaining strength and clarity. Instead of a speech, I said, my gaze fixed on my daughter's increasingly pale face, I want to show you my daughter's true dedication. I gestured towards the large screen behind the stage. The lights dimmed, and a short documentary, meticulously compiled by the private investigators, began to play. It was a damning indictment of Caroline's fraudulent activities. Images of forged receipts, intercepted phone calls, surreptitious footage of her shopping sprees, her boasts, her lies. The video culminated in a stark pie chart, revealing the devastating truth: 95% of the donations had been embezzled. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. I turned to Caroline, her face now ashen, her eyes wide with panic. "Justice must be served," I said, my voice ringing with the authority I once wielded in the courtroom, whether in or out of the courtroom. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Caroline was investigated, indicted, and ultimately convicted of fraud. Her reputation was destroyed, her social standing obliterated. It was a painful experience, witnessing my own daughter's downfall. But it was a necessary one. Justice had to be served. I took over the Blackwell Charitable Foundation, using my personal fortune to replenish the stolen funds and restructuring it into a transparent, accountable organization. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. In the end, I lost a daughter, but I regained my purpose. No longer just a retired judge, I became a guardian of justice once more, a beacon of integrity in a world often shrouded in darkness. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth fighting for. So, be vigilant. Question everything. Demand transparency. And never, ever underestimate the power of truth. Because in the end, it will always prevail. Don't let ambition blind you. Look at the facts. Support causes that are legitimate. Okay, let's delve deeper into this tangled web of family, ambition, and justice. We talked about looking at the facts, supporting causes that are legitimate. But what happens when the person you trust most, your own flesh and blood, becomes the source of the deception? That's the question that haunted me, Arthur Blackwell, for months. You see, I'd always prided myself on my ability to see through lies, to dissect arguments, to arrive at the truth. It was my life's work, sitting on the bench, dispensing justice. Retirement was supposed to be a time of peace, a quiet sunset after a long day. But my daughter, Caroline, had other plans. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation. It sounded noble, didn't it? My name, plastered across brochures, websites, even a gala invitation. The supposed goal? To support underprivileged children, a cause close to my heart. The reality? A carefully constructed facade, built on my reputation and fueled by Caroline's insatiable desire for fame. The irony stung. I, who had dedicated my life to upholding the law, was being used as a pawn in my own daughter's game. The anger simmered beneath the surface, a slow burn that threatened to consume me. At first, I dismissed the nagging feeling. Perhaps I was just being a cynical old man, suspicious of everything. But the more I observed, the more my unease grew. Caroline's constant name-dropping, the glossy photo shoots, the suspiciously vague financial reports, it all pointed to something amiss. Then came the phone call. A careless moment, a slip of the tongue, and the truth was revealed. Operating expenses, she called it. A designer handbag, a luxury spa treatment, all paid for with money meant for children in need. That was the last straw. The frustration was immense. I felt betrayed, not just as a father, but as a human being. The very principles I had lived by were being mocked and twisted. But I couldn't act rashly. I needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would expose Caroline's scheme. That's when I called Michael, an old colleague, a private investigator I trusted implicitly. He was discreet, thorough, and, most importantly, he understood my need for justice. What followed was a meticulous investigation. Michael and his team followed Caroline's every move, documenting her lavish spending, tracking the flow of funds, uncovering the network of lies she had spun. The reports were damning. Less than 5% of the donations actually reached the intended recipients. The rest was siphoned off to fund Caroline's extravagant lifestyle. The determination hardened within me. I wouldn't let her get away with this. The plan began to take shape. I would play the part of the doddering old father, oblivious to Caroline's machinations. I would attend the gala, smile for the cameras, and let her bask in the false adulation. But all the while I would be gathering my forces, preparing for the moment of truth. The calculation was cold, precise. I knew that exposing Caroline would be painful, a public humiliation that would reverberate through our family. But justice demanded it. The night of the gala arrived. Caroline was radiant, basking in the spotlight. She accepted the Philanthropist of the Year award with a saccharine smile, thanking me profusely for my inspiration. The irony was almost unbearable. She invited me to speak, a final act of self-aggrandizement, unaware that she was walking into a trap of her own making. I rose from my chair, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. I spoke of the importance of integrity, of the responsibility we all have to uphold the truth. And then, I revealed the evidence. The documentary, compiled by Michael and his team, played on the screen behind me. The receipts, the phone recordings, the furtive footage of Caroline's shopping sprees, it was all there, plain for everyone to see. The pie chart, stark and damning, showed the truth, 95% of the donations embezzled. The room was silent, the air thick with shock and disbelief. Caroline stood frozen on the stage, her face ashen. I looked at her, my heart heavy with sadness, but my resolve unwavering. Justice must be served, I said, my voice echoing through the hall, whether in or out of the courtroom. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Caroline was investigated for fraud, her reputation shattered. The charity was shut down, its name forever tarnished. It was a painful chapter, a devastating blow to our family. But it was also a necessary one. In the end, I used my own resources to repay the stolen funds and restructured the foundation, ensuring transparency and accountability. I became the guardian of its mission, a role I embraced with renewed purpose. It wasn't the retirement I had envisioned, but it was a chance to reclaim my integrity and to ensure that at least some good came from the ashes of Caroline's deception. The experience taught me a harsh but valuable lesson, that even those closest to us are capable of betrayal, and that the pursuit of justice must never be compromised, even when it cuts to the bone. So, be vigilant, be discerning, and always, always, demand the truth. Because in the end, it's the only thing that truly matters. So, be vigilant, be discerning, and always, always, demand the truth. Because in the end, it's the only thing that truly matters. And believe me, I learned that lesson the hard way, through a betrayal that cut deeper than any courtroom battle I ever faced. It was a betrayal from my own flesh and blood, my daughter Caroline. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had poured my heart and soul into raising, turned out to be a stranger, driven by a thirst for fame and recognition that overshadowed any semblance of familial love or respect. The pain, the sheer, agonizing pain of discovering that your child, the person you would gladly give your life for, is capable of such deceit is a unique kind of torment. It's a wound that festers, a constant reminder of your own failings as a parent, as a guide. You question every decision you ever made, every word you ever spoke, wondering where you went wrong, how you could have possibly missed the signs. Was I too lenient? Too strict? Too focused on my career, leaving her craving attention? The questions swirled in my mind, a relentless tempest of self-doubt and recrimination. But amidst the pain, a cold, hard anger began to simmer. It was the anger of a man who had dedicated his life to justice, to uncovering the truth, and to holding those who dared to break the law accountable for their actions. I had spent decades dissecting lies, exposing deceit, and delivering verdicts that upheld the principles of fairness and integrity. And now, my own daughter was attempting to pull the wool over my eyes, to exploit my reputation for her own selfish gain. The irony was almost unbearable. That's when the calculation began. The retired judge, the seemingly frail old man, was still very much alive and kicking. I knew I couldn't confront Caroline directly. She would simply deny everything, gaslight me, and possibly even attempt to further manipulate the situation to her advantage. No, this required a different approach, a calculated strategy that would expose her deceit in a way that was undeniable and irreversible. So, I hired a private investigator, a man I trusted implicitly, a man who had worked with me on several cases during my time on the bench. I tasked him with following Caroline, documenting her every move, uncovering the truth behind the Blackwell Charitable Foundation. And what he uncovered was even more sickening than I had imagined. Lavish spending, first-class travel, designer handbags, all funded by donations intended for those in need. Less than 5% of the money raised actually made it to the people it was supposed to help. It was a blatant, heartless act of embezzlement, disguised as philanthropy. The frustration was immense. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I knew I had to remain calm, to stick to the plan. The detective continued to gather evidence, meticulously documenting Caroline's deceit. I played the part of the doting, oblivious father, attending her events, smiling for the cameras, all the while seething with anger and resentment. The culmination of Caroline's scheme was the annual charity ball, a grand affair designed to solidify her reputation as a philanthropist and to further solicit donations. It was to be held in my honor, a sickening display of hypocrisy that I could barely stomach. But it was also the perfect opportunity to expose her, to reveal the truth to the world. The night of the ball arrived, and I played my part to perfection. I sat at the head table, looking frail and unsteady, allowing Caroline to bask in the spotlight. She took the stage, accepting the Philanthropist of the Year award with a beaming smile, completely unaware of the trap that was about to spring. She invited me to speak, a gesture she undoubtedly thought would further enhance her image. And that's when I delivered my verdict. I began softly, my voice trembling slightly, as if overcome with emotion. But as I spoke, my voice grew stronger, clearer, more resonant, the voice of the judge who had presided over countless trials, the voice of authority and truth. Instead of a speech, I said, I want to show you my daughter's true dedication. I gestured towards a large screen behind the stage, and the documentary began to play. It was a carefully edited compilation of the evidence gathered by the detective, receipts, bank statements, phone recordings, furtive footage of Caroline shopping and bragging. The room fell silent as the truth unfolded before their eyes. The video concluded with a pie chart, starkly illustrating that 95% of the donations had been embezzled. Caroline stood on the stage, her face ashen, her eyes wide with panic. The room was filled with murmurs of shock and disbelief. I looked directly at my daughter, my voice filled with a cold, unwavering resolve. Justice must be served, I said, whether in or out of the courtroom. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Caroline was investigated for fraud, and her reputation was completely destroyed. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation was shut down, and the money that had been stolen was recovered. It was a painful and public downfall, but it was a necessary one. In the end, I took over the charity, using my own personal fortune to replace the stolen funds and restructuring it into a transparent and efficient organization. I was no longer just a retired judge, I was once again a guardian of justice, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. It was a long and arduous journey, filled with pain and disappointment, but it ultimately led me back to my purpose, back to the principles that had guided my life. And perhaps, in some small way, it also offered a glimmer of hope for reconciliation, a chance for Caroline to learn from her mistakes and to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty and integrity. But that, ultimately, was a choice she had to make for herself. And perhaps, in some small way, it also offered a glimmer of hope for reconciliation, a chance for Caroline to learn from her mistakes and to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty and integrity. But that, ultimately, was a choice she had to make for herself. The silence after the video ended was deafening, a stark contrast to the celebratory atmosphere that had permeated the room just moments before. I looked at Caroline, her face a mask of disbelief and shame, the carefully constructed facade of philanthropy crumbling before her very eyes. My heart ached, not just for the betrayal, but for the wasted potential, the squandered opportunity to do genuine good. Was this the daughter I had raised, the child I had poured my life into? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and personal reflection. The investigation into the Blackwell Charitable Foundation revealed a web of deceit far more intricate than I had initially imagined. Caroline had not only embezzled funds but had also falsified documents, manipulated donors, and exploited my reputation for her own selfish gain. The anger I felt was a cold, burning rage, a righteous indignation at the injustice she had perpetrated. But beneath the anger lay a profound sadness, a deep sense of disappointment that cut me to the core. I had always strived to instill in her the values of honesty, integrity, and compassion, and yet, she had chosen to disregard them all in pursuit of wealth and recognition. The irony of it all was almost unbearable. Here I was, a retired judge, a man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law, now forced to confront the fact that my own daughter had become a criminal. The weight of that realization was crushing, a burden that threatened to overwhelm me. But I refused to succumb to despair. I had a responsibility, not only to the donors who had been defrauded but also to the community that had placed its trust in the Blackwell name. I owed it to them to ensure that justice was served and that the charity was salvaged. Taking control of the foundation was a daunting task. The damage Caroline had inflicted was extensive, and rebuilding trust would take time and effort. But I was determined to succeed. I assembled a team of dedicated professionals, including accountants, lawyers, and non-profit experts, and together we set about restructuring the organization from the ground up. We implemented strict financial controls, established a transparent governance structure, and refocused the charity's mission on serving the needs of the community. I poured my personal fortune into the foundation, not only to replace the stolen funds but also to demonstrate my unwavering commitment to its success. The experience was transformative. It forced me to confront my own shortcomings as a father, to acknowledge the role I had played in shaping Caroline's character. Perhaps I had been too lenient, too indulgent, too focused on my own career to notice the warning signs. Perhaps I had failed to instill in her a true sense of empathy and compassion. Whatever the reasons, I knew that I could not change the past, but I could learn from it. I could use this experience to become a better person, a more engaged father, and a more effective advocate for justice. As the charity began to thrive under my leadership, I found a renewed sense of purpose in my life. No longer content to sit on the sidelines, I became actively involved in the community, volunteering my time, mentoring young people, and speaking out on issues that mattered to me. I discovered that true fulfillment came not from wealth or recognition but from making a positive difference in the lives of others. And perhaps, in time, Caroline would come to realize that as well. The courtroom drama was over, but the personal drama was just beginning. The road to reconciliation would be long and arduous, but I was willing to walk it, one step at a time, hoping that one day, my daughter would join me. The anger had subsided, replaced by a cautious optimism and a quiet determination to rebuild what had been broken. The future remained uncertain, but I faced it with a newfound sense of hope and an unwavering belief in the power of redemption. And maybe, just maybe, this whole ordeal, as painful as it was, would ultimately lead to a stronger, more meaningful relationship with my daughter, a relationship built on honesty, trust, and unconditional love. The future remained uncertain, but I faced it with a newfound sense of hope and an unwavering belief in the power of redemption. And maybe, just maybe, this whole ordeal, as painful as it was, would ultimately lead to a stronger, more meaningful relationship with my daughter, a relationship built on honesty, trust, and unconditional love. But the road to that reconciliation was paved with the jagged stones of her deception and my own calculated response. I remember the simmering rage, the almost unbearable frustration of watching her manipulate my name, my legacy, for her own shallow ambitions. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any legal case I had ever presided over. There was a certain irony in it all, wasn't there? A judge, a man dedicated to upholding the law, resorting to, well, not illegal acts, but certainly underhanded ones. Hiring a private investigator, meticulously gathering evidence, plotting a public takedown, it wasn't exactly the behavior befitting a pillar of the community. But what choice did I have? Confront her privately? I knew Caroline. She would have denied everything, spun a web of lies so intricate that even I, with all my years of experience in the courtroom, would have struggled to unravel it. No, this required a different approach, a calculated dismantling of her carefully constructed facade. And the anger, oh, the anger was a constant companion. Anger at her for her blatant disregard for my reputation, for the people she was defrauding, for the very idea that she thought she could get away with it. But there was also anger at myself. Had I failed as a father? Had I somehow instilled in her this insatiable need for attention, this willingness to sacrifice integrity for fleeting fame? These questions haunted me, swirling in my mind like a persistent storm. The charity itself, once I had taken it over, became my focus. I poured my energy into restructuring it, ensuring complete transparency and accountability. It was a way to atone, not just for Caroline's sins, but perhaps for my own perceived shortcomings as a parent. I used my own funds to replenish the stolen donations, ensuring that those who had been cheated would finally receive the help they desperately needed. It was a long and arduous process, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a feeling that I was finally making amends. The courtroom had always been a place of order, of justice, where facts were presented and decisions were made based on evidence and reason. But this situation with Caroline was different. It was messy, emotional, deeply personal. It forced me to confront not only her flaws but my own. It challenged my beliefs about family, about forgiveness, about the very nature of justice itself. And then there was the weight of my decision to expose her so publicly. Even as I watched the video play, revealing her deceit to the stunned audience, a part of me felt a pang of regret. Was this truly the best way? Was there any other path I could have taken? But then I would remember her callous laughter on that phone call, her blatant disregard for the suffering of others, and my resolve would harden once again. Justice had to be served, even if it meant sacrificing my own daughter's reputation. The aftermath was, as expected, chaotic. The media descended, hungry for details. Caroline was vilified, her life irrevocably altered. But amidst the storm, I found a strange sense of calm. I had done what I believed was right, even though it was incredibly painful. And now, all that remained was to pick up the pieces and try to rebuild, not just the charity, but also my relationship with my daughter. The legal proceedings that followed were a blur. I recused myself from any involvement, of course, but I made sure she had the best possible legal representation. I didn't want to see her destroyed, just held accountable. I wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions, to learn from her mistakes, and to ultimately, find redemption herself. And in the quiet moments, after the cameras had gone and the dust had settled, I would find myself thinking about Caroline. Wondering if she understood why I had done what I did. Hoping that one day, she would forgive me. And perhaps, more importantly, forgive herself. The future remained uncertain, but the possibility of reconciliation, however distant, was enough to keep me going. It was a faint glimmer of hope in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of a father's love, even in the face of betrayal. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time, towards a future where justice and forgiveness could finally coexist. It was a faint glimmer of hope in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of a father's love, even in the face of betrayal. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time, towards a future where justice and forgiveness could finally coexist. The weight of Caroline's actions, the sheer audacity of her deception, still pressed heavily on my soul. It was a pain unlike any I had ever experienced, a wound inflicted not by an enemy, but by my own flesh and blood. The anger, a burning, righteous fire, threatened to consume me at times. How could she? How could she so casually disregard the principles I had instilled in her, the values I had dedicated my life to upholding? The irony was almost unbearable. I, a judge, a man who had spent decades dispensing justice, had been so blind to the injustice brewing within my own family. But amidst the pain and anger, a sense of calm began to settle. It was the calm of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and yet still believed in the possibility of redemption. It was the calm of a strategist, a man who knew that the battle was not yet over. Caroline's actions had consequences, not only for her but also for the people who had trusted her, the people who had donated to her fraudulent charity. I felt a profound sense of responsibility to make things right, to ensure that the money she had stolen was returned, and that the charity could continue to serve its intended purpose. The frustration, however, was palpable. The wheels of justice grind slowly, and I knew that bringing Caroline to account would be a lengthy and arduous process. The legal battles, the media scrutiny, the public humiliation, it would all take its toll. But I was determined to see it through. I had a duty, not just to myself but to the community, to demonstrate that no one, not even my own daughter, was above the law. My decision to hire a private investigator, a man named Reynolds, had been a difficult one. It felt like a betrayal of trust, a violation of the sacred bond between father and daughter. But I knew that I couldn't rely on my own emotions to guide me. I needed facts, hard evidence, to prove Caroline's guilt. Reynolds, with his quiet professionalism and unwavering dedication, had been invaluable. He had uncovered the trail of lavish spending, the hidden bank accounts, the web of lies that Caroline had so carefully constructed. His work had been instrumental in exposing her deceit and bringing her to justice. The night of the charity ball, the night of Caroline's public takedown, was a blur of emotions. I remember sitting at the head table, feeling a mixture of sadness, anger, and a strange sense of detachment. Caroline, beaming with pride, had looked radiant in her designer gown, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. When she invited me to speak, I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was time. As I stood on the stage, my voice trembling at first, I could see the confusion and concern on her face. But it was too late. The documentary, compiled from Reynolds' meticulous investigation, played out on the screen behind me, revealing the truth for all to see. The silence in the room was deafening. The aftermath was chaotic. Caroline was immediately subjected to a barrage of questions from the media and the authorities. Her reputation, once so carefully cultivated, was in tatters. The investigation into her fraudulent activities began almost immediately. For me, it was a period of intense soul-searching. I grappled with feelings of guilt, shame, and profound disappointment. Had I failed as a father? Had I been too focused on my career, too blind to the needs of my own daughter? But I refused to succumb to despair. I knew that I had to channel my energy into rebuilding the charity, ensuring that it would serve as a lasting legacy of good. I used my personal fortune to replace the embezzled funds and restructured the organization to ensure transparency and accountability. I appointed a new board of directors, comprised of individuals with impeccable integrity and a deep commitment to the charity's mission. Slowly but surely, the Blackwell Charitable Foundation began to regain its footing. In the end, Caroline was held accountable for her actions. She faced legal consequences and suffered the humiliation of public disgrace. While I couldn't condone her behavior, I also couldn't abandon her completely. I visited her regularly, offering her support and encouragement. I hoped that one day, she would understand the gravity of her actions and find a path to redemption. My journey through this ordeal has been a painful but ultimately transformative one. I have learned the importance of vigilance, the fragility of trust, and the enduring power of forgiveness. I have emerged from the ashes, a stronger and more compassionate man. And I am determined to use my experience to help others, to fight for justice, and to ensure that no one else suffers the same betrayal that I did. Remember, even in the darkest of times, hope remains. Never give up on the pursuit of justice and the possibility of reconciliation. It's a fight worth fighting. Okay, let's delve deeper into this story of betrayal, justice, and ultimately, a sliver of hope. Where do we begin? Perhaps with the simmering anger that never truly left me, even as I rebuilt the Blackwell Charitable Foundation. You see, it wasn't just the money Caroline stole, it was the theft of something far more precious, my legacy. For decades, I had strived to uphold the law, to be a beacon of integrity in a world often shrouded in shadows. And then, my own daughter, the one I had nurtured and loved, used my name as a mere stepping stone to her own selfish ambitions. The irony of it all was almost unbearable. Here I was, a judge who had spent his life dissecting lies and exposing deceit, and I had been completely blind to the charade unfolding right under my nose. That realization stung more than any courtroom defeat. It fueled my determination to not only expose her but also to reclaim what she had tainted. The name Blackwell would stand for something again, something real and meaningful. The detective I hired, a man named Miller, became my confidant, my silent partner in this quest for justice. He was meticulous, methodical, and utterly discreet. He provided me with a steady stream of evidence, each piece more damning than the last. Lavish dinners, designer clothes, first-class trips to exotic locations, all funded by the donations meant for the truly needy. The frustration mounted with each report. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, but I knew I had to remain calm, to stick to the plan. The annual charity ball became the focal point of my calculated revenge. It was to be her moment of triumph, the culmination of her deceit. And it would also be her downfall. I played the part of the frail, doting father to perfection, letting her bask in the spotlight, all the while knowing that the truth was about to shatter her carefully constructed facade. That night, as she stood on stage, accepting the award for Philanthropist of the Year, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was anger, of course, but also a profound sadness. This was my daughter, after all. But sentimentality had no place in the pursuit of justice. When I took the stage, my voice trembling initially, I could see the smug satisfaction on her face. She truly believed she had won. Then the video started. The silence in the room was deafening as the evidence unfolded on the screen. Receipts, recordings, surveillance footage, a comprehensive indictment of her greed and deception. The pie chart at the end, starkly illustrating the minuscule percentage of donations that actually reached the intended beneficiaries, was the final nail in the coffin. The color drained from Caroline's face. Her carefully crafted composure crumbled before my eyes. I looked directly at her, my voice now strong and clear, and delivered the line I had rehearsed in my mind countless times: justice must be served, whether in or out of the courtroom. The aftermath was chaotic. The police investigation, the media frenzy, the complete and utter destruction of her reputation. It was exactly what I had planned, but it brought me no joy. In fact, it left me with a hollow ache in my heart. But amidst the wreckage, there was an opportunity for redemption. I decided to take over the Blackwell Charitable Foundation, pouring my own personal fortune into it to replace the stolen funds. I restructured the organization from the ground up, ensuring complete transparency and accountability. No more lavish expenses, no more personal enrichment. Every dollar would go directly to those in need. It was a long and arduous process, but slowly, the foundation began to regain its credibility. People started to trust us again, to believe in our mission. And in a way, I found a new purpose in life. No longer just a retired judge, I became a guardian of justice once more, fighting for the vulnerable and holding the corrupt accountable. The experience changed me. It hardened me, perhaps, but it also made me more compassionate. I saw the depths of human depravity, but I also witnessed the resilience of the human spirit. And I learned a valuable lesson, that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for redemption. Never give up on the pursuit of justice and the possibility of reconciliation. It's a fight worth fighting, even when it involves those closest to you. Because ultimately, justice is not just about punishing the guilty, it's about restoring what has been broken and creating a better world for all. And sometimes, it's about finding a way to forgive, even when forgiveness seems impossible. The road to reconciliation is long and difficult, but it's a road worth traveling. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation, reborn from the ashes of betrayal, stands as a testament to that enduring hope. It's a reminder that even from the deepest wounds, something beautiful and meaningful can emerge. And that, perhaps, is the greatest justice of all. It's a reminder that even from the deepest wounds, something beautiful and meaningful can emerge. And that, perhaps, is the greatest justice of all. But let me tell you, the path to that justice was paved with shards of betrayal and the bitter taste of disappointment. You see, when you dedicate your life to upholding the law, to ensuring fairness and integrity, you expect those closest to you to share those values, or at least respect them. To discover that your own child, someone you raised and loved, would so flagrantly disregard those principles for personal gain, well, it cuts deeper than any gavel I've ever wielded. There's a unique kind of pain that comes with realizing you've been a fool. I, a man who spent decades dissecting lies and uncovering deceit, had been so blind to the machinations of my own daughter. The irony is almost unbearable. I prided myself on my ability to see through facades, to understand the subtle nuances of human behavior. Yet, Caroline, with her carefully crafted image and her honeyed words, had managed to pull the wool over my eyes for far too long. Perhaps it was my age, a growing complacency, or simply a father's unwavering love, but whatever the reason, I allowed myself to be deceived. And that realization, that vulnerability, fueled a simmering anger, a burning need to rectify the wrong. It wasn't just the money she stole, though that was certainly reprehensible. It was the exploitation of my name, the manipulation of public trust, the utter disregard for the people she claimed to be helping. She built her empire on a foundation of lies, using my reputation as a stepping stone to climb to the top. And the gall of it all, to call it the Blackwell Charitable Foundation, as if she were honoring me. It was a mockery, a twisted parody of everything I stood for. That's when the calm, calculating judge took over. The hurt father receded, replaced by a man who knew how to gather evidence, build a case, and deliver a verdict. Hiring the private investigator was a necessary step, a cold and pragmatic decision. I needed irrefutable proof, a clear and undeniable record of Caroline's misdeeds. I couldn't rely on hearsay or assumptions. I needed facts, hard evidence that would stand up to scrutiny. And the detective, a man I'd worked with on several cases in the past, was the perfect choice. He was discreet, thorough, and utterly relentless. He understood the gravity of the situation and the need for absolute accuracy. He became my eyes and ears, documenting Caroline's every move, uncovering her hidden accounts, and exposing the truth behind her carefully constructed facade. The frustration was immense. Watching her bask in the limelight, accepting accolades for her philanthropy, knowing that it was all a sham, was almost unbearable. But I had to remain patient, to bide my time, to allow her to dig her own grave. I knew that the more successful she appeared, the harder the fall would be. And I was determined to make that fall as spectacular as possible. The annual charity ball became the focal point, the stage upon which I would expose her lies and deliver justice. It was a calculated risk, but one I was willing to take. The moment I took the stage, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. There was anger, yes, but also a deep sadness, a profound sense of disappointment. But above all, there was a steely resolve, a determination to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. As the documentary played, revealing Caroline's deceit to the world, I saw the color drain from her face. The smugness, the arrogance, the carefully constructed facade all crumbled before my eyes. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of vindication and regret. I had exposed her lies, but I had also destroyed my daughter. The aftermath was chaotic, a whirlwind of investigations, accusations, and public condemnation. Caroline's reputation was shattered, her career ruined. She faced legal consequences for her actions, and rightly so. But even as I watched her downfall, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. She was my daughter, after all, and I loved her, despite everything. Taking over the charity was my way of salvaging something from the wreckage. I used my own resources to make amends, to ensure that the money reached the people it was intended for. And I restructured the organization to be transparent and accountable, preventing any future abuses. In the end, justice was served, though not in the way I had initially envisioned. Caroline faced the consequences of her actions, and the charity was restored to its original purpose. But the experience left me with a profound understanding of the complexities of human nature, the depths of deceit, and the enduring power of hope. It taught me that even in the face of betrayal, it is possible to find redemption, to rebuild trust, and to create something meaningful from the ashes of destruction. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. Remember, even when those closest to you falter, integrity and truth will always prevail. Be vigilant, be discerning, and never compromise your values. Your actions, no matter how small, can contribute to a more just and equitable world. Continuing from, be vigilant, be discerning, and never compromise your values. Your actions, no matter how small, can contribute to a more just and equitable world. And that's what I thought I'd instilled in my daughter, Caroline. Perhaps that was my greatest failure as a father, believing too strongly in the image I'd created in my own mind. The pain, you see, isn't just the betrayal. It's the realization that I was so blind, so willing to see only what I wanted to see. I wanted to see a daughter who embodied the principles I'd dedicated my life to upholding. Instead, I saw a reflection of the very things I fought against. The irony, of course, is thick enough to choke on. A judge, a man of supposed impeccable judgment, utterly failing to see the truth about his own child. It's a bitter pill to swallow, this realization that my legacy, the Blackwell name, was being used as a mere stepping stone for her ambition. A charity, mind you, a supposed beacon of hope, twisted into a vehicle for designer handbags and first-class flights. The calculation was cold, precise, and utterly devoid of conscience. She knew my reputation, knew the weight it carried, and she exploited it without a second thought. That's what cuts the deepest. But beneath the pain, beneath the burning anger, there was a calm. A judge doesn't just react, he assesses, he analyzes, he builds a case. And that's precisely what I did. I became a silent observer, a puppeteer pulling strings from the shadows. I watched her dance, watched her bask in the false adoration, all the while knowing the curtain was about to fall. It was a game of patience, a test of will, and I was determined to see it through. The frustration was immense, believe me. To sit there, feigning frailty, while she paraded around like some philanthropic savior, it was infuriating. Every forced smile, every insincere thank you, felt like a blow. But I had to remain composed, had to play the part. Because the longer she believed I was oblivious, the more rope she gave me to hang her with. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the facade while simultaneously gathering the irrefutable evidence that would shatter her carefully constructed world. The detective, a former colleague from my days on the bench, proved invaluable. He was discreet, thorough, and utterly relentless. He unearthed a mountain of evidence, lavish bills, falsified documents, recorded conversations that painted a damning picture of Caroline's greed. Each piece of evidence fueled my determination, solidified my resolve to bring her to justice. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about accountability, about upholding the very principles I had sworn to defend. The night of the gala, the Blackwell Charitable Foundation annual ball, was surreal. Caroline, resplendent in a gown that probably cost more than some families make in a year, beamed at the crowd, soaking in the applause. She introduced me, her voice dripping with saccharine affection, and I played my part, the frail, doting father. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. The stage was set, the trap was sprung, and I was about to unleash the full force of my carefully orchestrated plan. When she took the stage to accept the Philanthropist of the Year award, I felt a pang of something akin to pity. She was so close to the pinnacle of her ambition, so convinced of her invincibility. Little did she know, her downfall was imminent. And it would be public, humiliating, and utterly devastating. My voice, initially weak, grew stronger with each word, each sentence. The years of presiding over a courtroom, of commanding attention and demanding truth, came flooding back. The video, meticulously compiled by the detective, played out on the screen behind us, a stark and brutal indictment of Caroline's actions. The gasps, the whispers, the stunned silence that followed were deafening. Justice, as I said, must be served, whether in or out of the courtroom. And while the consequences for Caroline were severe, the investigation, the ruined reputation, the loss of everything she had craved, there was a measure of tolerance, even reconciliation, in my heart. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but an understanding of the pressures, the insecurities, that had driven her down this path. Taking over the charity, rebuilding it from the ground up, was my way of turning a tragedy into something positive. Using my own resources to replace the stolen funds, ensuring transparency and accountability, it was a way of reclaiming my legacy, of proving that the Blackwell name still stood for something. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And in the end, it gave me a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, justice can prevail. So, be vigilant, be discerning, and never compromise your values. And in the end, it gave me a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, justice can prevail. So, be vigilant, be discerning, and never compromise your values. But the story doesn't quite end there, does it? The fallout from Caroline's exposure was significant, not just for her, but for everyone involved. The initial shock and anger I felt were immense, a deep betrayal that cut me to the core. It was a pain compounded by the public nature of it all, the shame and embarrassment washing over me like a tidal wave. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law had been so thoroughly deceived by his own flesh and blood. There was a period of intense calculation. What would be the long-term impact on my legacy? How could I possibly salvage the situation and restore my reputation? I had to consider the legal ramifications, the media scrutiny, and the emotional toll it would take on my family. My mind, trained for years to dissect complex cases, now focused on the intricate web of deceit Caroline had spun. Each thread had to be untangled, each lie exposed, not just for the sake of justice, but for my own peace of mind. I remember the calm that settled over me as I began to map out the next steps. It was the same calm I felt in the courtroom, the unwavering focus that allowed me to see through the noise and zero in on the truth. This wasn't just about punishing Caroline, it was about rebuilding something meaningful from the wreckage. It was about ensuring that the Blackwell name, once synonymous with integrity, would not be forever tarnished by her greed. The frustration was palpable in those early days. The slow grind of the legal process, the endless paperwork, the constant media inquiries, it was all incredibly draining. There were moments when I questioned whether I had the strength to see it through. But then I would remind myself of the people who had been genuinely hurt by Caroline's actions, the vulnerable individuals who had placed their trust in her foundation, only to be exploited. Their faces fueled my determination. The trial itself was a grueling affair. Caroline, initially defiant, eventually crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Her carefully constructed facade of philanthropy disintegrated, revealing the selfish ambition that lay beneath. Watching her on the stand, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, and a flicker of pity. This was my daughter, after all, the child I had raised and loved. But I couldn't allow sentimentality to cloud my judgment. Justice had to be served. The severity of the judge's sentence reflected the magnitude of Caroline's crimes. It was a painful chapter in our family history, one that would forever be etched in our memories. But amidst the darkness, there was also a glimmer of hope. The outpouring of support from the community was overwhelming. People recognized that I, too, had been a victim of Caroline's deception, and they admired my courage in exposing her. And then there was the slow, arduous process of reconciliation. It wasn't easy. Caroline and I had many difficult conversations, filled with tears, anger, and recriminations. But eventually, we began to rebuild our relationship, brick by painful brick. I realized that forgiveness was not about condoning her actions, but about releasing the bitterness that threatened to consume me. It was about finding a way to move forward, not as adversaries, but as a family. I used my own money to make restitution to the people who had been wronged by the charity. I restructured the foundation, putting safeguards in place to ensure that something like this could never happen again. I involved community leaders, financial experts, and legal professionals to create a transparent and accountable organization. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation, reborn from the ashes of scandal, became a beacon of hope for those in need. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about restoring faith in the system, in the power of good to overcome evil. It was about showing that even in the face of unimaginable betrayal, redemption is possible. And it was about teaching Caroline a valuable lesson about the importance of integrity, empathy, and selfless service. In the end, Caroline paid her debt to society. She lost her reputation, her social standing, and her freedom. But she also gained something valuable, a newfound understanding of the consequences of her actions and a genuine desire to make amends. She started volunteering at a local homeless shelter, working tirelessly to help those less fortunate than herself. It was a far cry from the glamorous galas and designer handbags she had once craved, but it was a path that led to true fulfillment. And me? Well, I returned to my quiet life, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I had faced my greatest challenge and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to use my skills and resources to make a positive impact on the world. The Blackwell name, once tarnished by scandal, now stood for something even more meaningful: resilience, redemption, and unwavering commitment to justice. So, let this be a lesson to all: truth will always prevail, and even in the darkest of times, hope remains. The Blackwell name, once tarnished by scandal, now stood for something even more meaningful: resilience, redemption, and unwavering commitment to justice. So, let this be a lesson to all: truth will always prevail, and even in the darkest of times, hope remains. But the storm didn't simply vanish. The echoes of Caroline's betrayal reverberated through my life, leaving a residue of pain that time, even with its supposed healing powers, couldn't fully erase. There were nights, I confess, when sleep eluded me, replaced by the haunting images of her smug face on that stage, moments before the carefully constructed facade crumbled. The anger, a cold, simmering rage, threatened to consume me. It was the anger of a father betrayed, a judge whose sense of justice had been violated in the most personal way imaginable. And yet, beneath the anger, there was a profound sadness. A sadness for the daughter I thought I knew, the bright, ambitious girl who had somehow lost her way. I tried to understand what had driven her to such depths of deceit. Was it the relentless pursuit of fame? The insatiable hunger for validation from a world that often rewards superficiality over substance? Or was it something deeper, a void within her that she desperately tried to fill with the fleeting pleasures of wealth and recognition? I wrestled with these questions, searching for answers that remained stubbornly elusive. The irony, of course, was not lost on me. As a judge, I had spent my life dispensing justice, upholding the law, and holding others accountable for their actions. Now, I found myself in the unenviable position of having to judge my own daughter, the very person I had sworn to protect and nurture. The weight of that responsibility was almost unbearable. I had to be objective, detached, and fair, even when my heart was breaking. It was a trial unlike any I had ever faced, a trial that tested the limits of my strength and resolve. The decision to involve the private investigator was not taken lightly. It was a calculated move, a necessary step to uncover the truth and ensure that justice was served. I knew that confronting Caroline directly would likely be futile. She was a skilled manipulator, adept at deflecting blame and twisting narratives to her advantage. I needed irrefutable evidence, concrete proof of her wrongdoing, to expose her scheme and prevent her from causing further harm. Hiring a detective was a difficult choice, but it was one I made with a clear conscience, knowing that it was the only way to bring her to account. The detective's reports were a constant source of frustration and determination. Each new revelation, each piece of incriminating evidence, fueled my resolve to expose Caroline's lies. I meticulously reviewed the documents, analyzed the financial records, and listened to the surreptitiously recorded phone conversations. The more I learned, the more appalled I became. The sheer audacity of her scheme, the callous disregard for the people she was exploiting, was breathtaking. It was a betrayal not only of my trust but also of the very principles of charity and compassion. The gala was a calculated risk, a gamble that I hoped would pay off. I knew that exposing Caroline in such a public forum would be devastating for her, but I also believed that it was the only way to ensure that she faced the consequences of her actions. I had to weigh the potential damage to her reputation against the need to protect the integrity of the Blackwell Charitable Foundation and prevent her from defrauding others. It was a difficult decision, but I ultimately concluded that the greater good demanded that I expose her deceit. Standing on that stage, facing the stunned silence of the audience, I felt a surge of calm and power. The years of experience in the courtroom had prepared me for this moment. I knew that my words would carry weight, that my actions would have profound consequences. I spoke with clarity and conviction, presenting the evidence in a way that was both compelling and irrefutable. As the video played, revealing the extent of Caroline's embezzlement, I watched her face crumble, her carefully constructed facade dissolving before my eyes. The aftermath was chaotic, filled with investigations, legal proceedings, and media scrutiny. Caroline's reputation was ruined, her career in tatters. But amidst the turmoil, there was a sense of resolution, a feeling that justice had finally been served. I took over the charity, using my own resources to make amends for the money that had been lost. I restructured the organization, implementing strict oversight measures to ensure transparency and accountability. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation, once a symbol of deceit, became a beacon of hope, providing genuine assistance to those in need. It was a long and arduous journey, but in the end, justice prevailed, and the Blackwell name, once tarnished by scandal, was finally redeemed. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation, once a symbol of deceit, became a beacon of hope, providing genuine assistance to those in need. It was a long and arduous journey, but in the end, justice prevailed, and the Blackwell name, once tarnished by scandal, was finally redeemed. But redemption, like justice, isn't a destination. It's a constant journey, a daily commitment to rebuilding trust and righting wrongs. Taking over the charity wasn't just about replacing the embezzled funds. It was about dismantling the entire structure of deceit Caroline had erected and building something genuinely meaningful in its place. The anger, the sheer boiling rage I felt at her betrayal, threatened to consume me. To see my own flesh and blood, someone I had nurtured and loved, stoop to such a level of calculated manipulation, it was a pain unlike any I had experienced on the bench. But anger, unchecked, is a destructive force. I knew I couldn't let it cloud my judgment, not if I wanted to truly make things right. So, I channeled that fury, that righteous indignation, into rebuilding the foundation. I needed to ensure that every penny donated went directly to those who needed it most, that transparency and accountability were paramount. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a retired judge, forced to become a detective in my own family, a prosecutor of my own daughter. The courtroom had always been a place of order, of evidence and reason. But Caroline's actions had thrown me into a world of shadows, of hidden agendas and blatant lies. And yet, the principles remained the same: uncover the truth, expose the wrongdoing, and seek justice, no matter how painful. Rebuilding the charity required more than just money. It needed a complete overhaul of its governance, its processes, its very soul. I brought in experts, forensic accountants, seasoned charity administrators, people who understood the intricacies of nonprofit management and the importance of ethical fundraising. We established a board of directors composed of individuals with impeccable reputations, people who were committed to the foundation's mission and wouldn't tolerate any hint of impropriety. The weight of my decision to expose Caroline hung heavy. The public spectacle, the shame and humiliation, it was all a bitter pill to swallow. As a father, I yearned to protect her, to shield her from the consequences of her actions. But as a judge, I knew that justice demanded accountability, regardless of familial ties. Tolerance has its limits, and Caroline had crossed the line. My tolerance for deceit, for the exploitation of vulnerable people, had reached its breaking point. The media frenzy was relentless. Every tabloid, every news channel, was clamoring for a piece of the story. They painted Caroline as a villain, a socialite who had callously exploited her father's name for personal gain. And while much of it was true, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She had become a pariah, ostracized by her social circle, her reputation in tatters. But amidst the chaos, there was also a glimmer of hope. The public's response to the reformed Blackwell Charitable Foundation was overwhelming. Donations poured in from all corners of the country, from people who had been touched by the story and wanted to support a worthy cause. It was a testament to the power of redemption, to the belief that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail. The process of reconciliation with Caroline will be a long and difficult one. The wounds are deep, the scars will likely remain. But I hold on to the hope that one day, she will understand the gravity of her actions and seek genuine atonement. Perhaps, in time, she can even contribute to the work of the foundation, using her experience to educate others about the dangers of greed and the importance of integrity. Only time will tell. My life as a retired judge may have been disrupted, but it has found a new purpose. I am no longer just a guardian of the law, but a guardian of hope, a champion for those who have been wronged. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation stands as a testament to the power of justice, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unwavering belief that even in the face of betrayal, redemption is always possible. And that is a legacy worth fighting for. Remember, truth always prevails, even when hidden beneath layers of deceit. Be vigilant, be discerning, and never compromise on your principles. Your actions, no matter how small, can make a difference. Support genuine charities, demand transparency, and hold those in power accountable. The world needs more justice, more compassion, and more people willing to stand up for what is right. And that, my friends, is the story. A painful chapter, a betrayal that cut deeper than any courtroom battle, but ultimately, a victory for justice and a testament to the enduring power of truth. It's a story about family, ambition, and the devastating consequences of greed. It's a story that, I hope, serves as a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. Looking back, the anger still simmers, a low, constant hum. The irony isn't lost on me, a judge, a man dedicated to upholding the law, brought down by his own flesh and blood. The calculation involved in unraveling Caroline's web of deceit was meticulous, cold even. I had to detach myself, to see her not as my daughter, but as a subject under investigation. It was a necessary cruelty. The frustration, however, was the most difficult to bear. Watching her parade around, basking in the glow of fabricated philanthropy, knowing the truth that lay beneath the surface, was agonizing. The determination to expose her fueled me, kept me going when I felt like succumbing to the weight of disappointment. The trial, in its own way, was a public one. The court of public opinion is often harsher than any legal system. Not just for her, but for anyone who might consider exploiting the trust and goodwill of others for personal gain. But amidst the anger and the need for justice, there's also a glimmer of something else, tolerance. It's a slow, arduous process, but I'm learning to separate the Caroline I love, the daughter I remember, from the Caroline who orchestrated this charade. And perhaps, one day, reconciliation will be possible. But that day is not today. Today, I focus on the good that can come from this. The Blackwell Charitable Foundation, now under my stewardship, is a testament to that. We are committed to transparency, accountability, and ensuring that every dollar donated reaches those who need it most. We are rebuilding trust, brick by brick, and striving to make a real difference in the world. This experience has taught me many things. It's reinforced the importance of skepticism, of questioning everything, even when it comes from those closest to you. It's highlighted the fragility of trust and the devastating impact of betrayal. But most importantly, it's reminded me of the enduring power of justice and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. So, what can you take away from this story? What can you do to prevent similar situations from happening in your own communities? The answer is simple: be vigilant. Do your research before donating to any charity. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Hold those in power accountable. Don't be afraid to speak out against injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it involves people you care about. Because silence is complicity. And complicity allows corruption to flourish. Support genuine charities, demand transparency, and hold those in power accountable. The world needs more justice, more compassion, and more people willing to stand up for what is right. But beyond that, I urge you to consider the broader implications of this story. Think about the values we instill in our children. Are we teaching them the importance of integrity, honesty, and empathy? Or are we inadvertently fostering a culture of ambition at all costs, where success is measured solely by wealth and status? Let's strive to create a world where genuine altruism is valued above self-serving ambition. A world where integrity is rewarded, and corruption is punished. A world where trust is earned, not exploited. This isn't just about charity, it's about the very fabric of our society. It's about the values we uphold, the principles we defend, and the legacy we leave behind. My daughter's actions were a betrayal, a deep wound that will likely never fully heal. But from that wound, a seed of hope has been planted. A seed of change. A seed of justice. And it is my hope that that seed will continue to grow, to flourish, and to inspire others to stand up for what is right. To demand transparency. To fight for justice. Because in the end, that's all that truly matters. Not wealth. Not fame. Not power. But the unwavering commitment to truth, integrity, and compassion. That is the legacy I hope to leave behind. That is the legacy we all should strive to create. Thank you.